Hi, I'm Maya. When I walked into my sister's wedding reception alone, I could feel eyes tracking me like searchlights finding an escaped prisoner. Still single at 34, they whispered behind crystal champagne flutes. Too focused on her career to keep a man. My mother's tight smile said she agreed completely. My father pretended not to see me at all. And Olivia? She laughed so loudly the string quartet briefly paused their playing. But what none of them knew was who I truly was beneath their judgments. Because when the self-made tech millionaire from Silicon Valley walked directly toward me, and extended his hand with profound respect, the entire ballroom fell into stunned silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I guided my rental car through the winding roads of Sonoma Valley, where vineyards stretched like emerald quilts across the rolling hills. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape as I rehearsed what I would say when I arrived. 3 years had passed since I'd last seen most of my family together. 3 years of building my life while they assumed I was merely surviving. My navy silk dress felt suddenly inadequate as I approached the grand estate where my sister Olivia would marry into the Crawford family tomorrow. I'd chosen it carefully. Professional but elegant, like armor designed to deflect the inevitable comments about my perpetual singlehood. The jade pendant my grandmother left me provided my only sense of genuine connection to this gathering. The estate emerged from behind ancient oak trees like something from a fairy tale. Stone walls climbing with ivy, manicured gardens leading to a reception area glowing with string lights. I parked near the back, preferring to make my entrance with as little fanfare as possible. My hands trembled slightly as I checked my reflection. I looked put together, successful even, but I knew my family would see only what they wanted to see, the disappointing daughter who prioritized career over marriage. Name, please? The young attendant at the entrance glanced at his tablet, stylus poised. Maya Winters, I replied, straightening my shoulders. He scrolled through his list, frowning slightly. I don't see you here. Is it possible you're under a different name? A familiar weight settled in my stomach. Try the family section. I'm the bride's sister. His eyes widened slightly. Oh, I'm so sorry, Ms. Winters. Of course. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the garden. The reception is just through there. I nodded my thanks and walked forward, each step measured and deliberate. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses grew louder as I approached. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed overhead, casting a warm glow over round tables draped in cream linens. Crystal centerpieces caught the light, throwing prisms across the white roses and hydrangeas. The cocktail hour was in full swing. Groups had already formed, old family friends, Olivia's college roommates, our cousins who always traveled in pairs. I scanned the crowd, spotting my mother near the bar, elegant in her champagne-colored dress, laughing with Aunt Patricia. My father stood nearby, one hand in his pocket, the other clutching a tumbler of what was undoubtedly his preferred single malt. Neither of them saw me. Or perhaps they did and chose to look away. I made my way to the bar, ordered a sparkling water with lime, and tried to appear comfortable standing alone. The bartender gave me a sympathetic smile as he handed me my drink. Maya! You actually showed up. My cousin Danielle appeared beside me, her voice carrying a note of surprise that felt deliberately loud. I RSVP'd weeks ago, I replied, keeping my tone light. Wouldn't miss my sister's wedding. Danielle's gaze traveled over my dress, lingering on my sensible heels. Well, you look professional, as always. Before I could respond, she was waving to someone across the garden. There's Jessica. Must catch up. We'll talk later, okay? She squeezed my arm and disappeared into the crowd. I took a long sip of my water, wishing momentarily it contained something stronger. The evening stretched before me like an endurance test. If it isn't the career woman herself, came a voice from behind me. I turned to see my father's brother, Uncle Robert. His cheeks already flushed from alcohol. Your sister tells me you're some kind of business consultant now? Quote. Digital transformation strategist, I corrected gently. I help companies modernize their... Sounds complicated, he interrupted, his eyes already drifting toward the buffet. Must be why you never settled down. Men don't like competing with spreadsheets and whatever it is you do all day. He chuckled at his own joke, expecting me to join in the laughter at my own expense. I managed a tight smile instead. It keeps me busy. I bet it does. Well, good for you. Some people aren't meant for family life. He patted my shoulder like I was a child who'd drawn a mediocre picture he felt obligated to praise. Olivia's doing well, though. Marrying into the Crawfords. They own half the real estate in San Francisco, you know. I've heard, I said, though no one had actually told me much about the family my sister was marrying into. Our conversations had dwindled to obligatory holiday texts and occasional likes on social media posts. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Uncle Robert wandered off, and I found myself alone again. I moved toward the edge of the gathering, where a stone balustrade overlooked the vineyard below. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold. In the distance, workers moved between the rows of grapevines, their figures small against the vast landscape. She always was the odd one. The voice drifted from a nearby table, Aunt Patricia, speaking just loudly enough to ensure I could hear. Remember when she turned down that nice Anderson boy to move to Seattle for that startup job? He's a surgeon now, married with twins. A murmur of agreement followed. Some women just don't understand what really matters in life, another voice added. I gripped my glass tighter, staring fixedly at the horizon as though I hadn't heard them. This was exactly why I'd limited my visits home. Each time I left feeling smaller somehow, as though my achievements were invisible while my perceived failures were magnified for everyone to see. Maya! Olivia's voice cut through my thoughts. My sister approached in a flurry of designer perfume and ivory silk, her engagement ring catching the light with every animated gesture. You made it! She air-kissed both my cheeks, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup. I was just telling everyone I wasn't sure you'd come. You're always so busy with your, what is it called now, digital strategy? Digital transformation, I corrected, offering a genuine smile despite everything. Whatever our differences, she was still my sister. Congratulations, Olivia. Everything looks beautiful. Doesn't it? She beamed, gesturing around the garden. The Crawfords know how to do things properly. Speaking of which, she leaned closer, lowering her voice. I've seated you at table 8. It's a bit toward the back, but I thought you'd be more comfortable there. Most of them are James's work colleagues, so you'll have plenty to talk about. Translation, she'd placed me as far from the family as possible, with strangers who wouldn't know my history. That's fine, I said, keeping my expression neutral. I appreciate you thinking of me. She squeezed my arm. Of course. Now I should get back to greeting everyone. The Crawfords' business partners are here, and you know how important first impressions are. She started to turn away, then paused. Oh, and Maya? Maybe mingle a bit? Standing alone makes you look... Well, you know. With that parting advice, she swept back into the crowd, immediately transforming into a more animated version of herself as she approached a group of elegantly dressed older couples. I took another sip of my water, watching the social choreography unfold around me. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged in this carefully orchestrated event. Everyone except me. As the sun dipped lower, a bell chimed softly, signaling guests to find their seats for dinner. I made my way toward the back of the garden, where table numbers glowed on small lanterns. Table 8 was indeed at the periphery, partially obscured by a large floral arrangement. 3 people were already seated. A middle-aged couple who introduced themselves as James's father's golf partners, and a young woman who worked in the Crawford family's charitable foundation. They smiled politely as I joined them, then immediately resumed their conversation about renovations to the country club. I unfolded my napkin and placed it in my lap, resigning myself to an evening of polite small talk with strangers who had been just as strategically placed at this forgotten table. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up to find a man in his early 40s standing beside the empty chair next to mine. He wore a well-tailored charcoal suit with no tie, and his dark hair was slightly tousled, as though he'd been running his hands through it. "I don't believe so," I replied, glancing around the table. "I think we're still missing a few people." He smiled and pulled out the chair. "Thanks. I'm Nathan Reed." "Maya Winters." "Ah, the bride's sister?" He settled into his seat with an ease that suggested he was comfortable anywhere. I recognized the resemblance. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Olivia and I shared the same dark hair and high cheekbones, but she had always been the conventionally beautiful one. Softer, more polished, more willing to conform to expectations. "How do you know the couple?" I asked, deflecting. "I don't, really," he admitted, accepting a glass of wine from a passing server. "James and I crossed paths on a project about a year ago. I was surprised to get an invitation, to be honest." The woman from the foundation leaned forward. "Wait, Nathan Reed? From Horizon Ventures?" He nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable with the recognition. "Oh my goodness," she continued, eyes widening. "You funded SafeNet, didn't you? The encryption platform that revolutionized data security for nonprofit organizations? We use it at the foundation." Nathan smiled modestly. "That was mostly the founder's brilliant work. I just recognized its potential early on." "Don't be so humble," she insisted. "Everyone knows you have the best track record for identifying transformative technologies in Silicon Valley." I studied him with new interest. I'd heard of Horizon Ventures. They were known for backing startups that combined profit with social impact. Their portfolio companies had created everything from water purification systems to educational platforms that served underprivileged communities. "What brought you into venture capital?" I asked, genuinely curious. He turned toward me, seeming relieved by the change in subject. "Accident, really. I sold my first company at 26 and had no idea what to do with the money. Started investing in friends' startups, discovered I enjoyed helping new ventures grow more than running my own company." Our conversation was interrupted by the clinking of glasses. Olivia and James had taken their places at the head table, and the father of the groom was preparing to give a welcome speech. As attention shifted to the front of the garden, I noticed my mother watching me from a few tables away, her expression unreadable. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, leaning to whisper something to my father. The speeches began, loving tributes to the couple, anecdotes about their perfect partnership, predictions about their bright future together. With each toast, the contrast between Olivia's chosen path and mine seemed to grow more pronounced. She had followed the expected trajectory: college, career enough to be interesting but not demanding, marriage to a successful man from a good family. I had veered off course, prioritizing independence and professional fulfillment over the security of tradition. "Not much of a wedding person?" Nathan asked quietly as the fifth speaker took the microphone. I glanced at him, surprised by his perception. "Is it that obvious?" "You have the same look I get at industry awards dinners," he said with a small smile, polite interest masking the desire to be anywhere else. Despite myself, I laughed. "I'm happy for my sister," I clarified. "Really, it's just complicated?" he offered. "Family always is, isn't it?" The speeches finally concluded, and servers appeared with the first course, a delicate salad of local greens with goat cheese and candied walnuts. As conversation resumed around the table, Nathan turned toward me again. "So what do you do, Maya?" It was the standard question, but something in his tone suggested genuine interest rather than mere politeness. "I'm a digital transformation strategist," I said, prepared for the usual glazed expression that followed my job title. "I help established companies adapt to technological change, everything from modernizing their operations to reshaping their business models for the digital economy." Instead of looking confused or bored, he nodded thoughtfully. "That must be fascinating work. What's the biggest challenge you face with clients?" For the next 20 minutes, we discussed the resistance to change in corporate cultures, the difficulty of balancing innovation with stability, and the accelerating pace of technological disruption. He asked insightful questions and shared relevant examples from companies in his portfolio, never once glancing around the room or checking his phone. It was the first real conversation I'd had all evening, possibly the most engaging discussion I'd had in months. In my work, I was often the only woman in the room, carefully moderating my tone to be taken seriously without being labeled difficult. With Nathan, I found myself speaking freely, without calculating the impact of each word. As the main course was served, I became aware of glances from nearby tables. My mother had repositioned herself to keep me in her line of sight, and Olivia, despite being the center of attention at her own wedding, kept looking in our direction with an expression of growing curiosity. "I think we're attracting attention," Nathan commented, following my gaze. "Sorry about that," I said. My family isn't used to seeing me. Engaged in conversation, I suppose. "With a man?" he asked perceptively. I smiled ruefully. "With anyone. I'm usually the quiet one at family gatherings." "Well, you've been anything but quiet with me," he observed. "I've monopolized your attention through 2 courses. I've enjoyed it," I admitted. "Makes a nice change from defending my life choices, or hearing about my second cousin's perfect children." He laughed, a warm sound that drew more glances from nearby tables. Family gatherings are universal that way. At my last reunion, my aunt spent an hour explaining why my business success doesn't compensate for my failure to provide her with great nieces and nephews. The server arrived with dessert, a delicate lemon tart with fresh berries, and Nathan briefly excused himself. As soon as he was out of earshot, the woman from the foundation leaned toward me eagerly. "Do you know who you've been talking to all night?" she whispered. "Nathan Reed is one of the most influential investors in tech right now. His first company sold for over $200 million, and the venture fund he started has backed some of the most successful startups of the past decade." "He seems very down to earth," I said, unsure how else to respond. "Oh, he is," she agreed. "That's his whole thing. Lives in a modest house, drives an electric car that's not a Tesla, donates half his annual income to environmental causes. But make no mistake, he's connected to everyone who matters in Silicon Valley." Before she could continue, my sister appeared beside our table, her smile fixed and bright. "Maya, I've been trying to catch your eye for ages," Olivia said, though I hadn't noticed any such attempts. "Would you help me with something in the bridal suite?" "Just sister stuff." I knew this tactic from childhood, the "I need your help," that really meant, "I need to tell you something in private." I excused myself from the table and followed Olivia through the garden and into the main building. As soon as we were alone in the lavishly appointed bridal suite, she turned to face me. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. "Having dinner at my assigned table," I replied, genuinely confused by her reaction. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong is that you're monopolizing Nathan Reed. Do you have any idea who he is? We were just talking about work. He's not just some random Silicon Valley guy, Maya. The Crawfords have been trying to get Horizon Ventures to fund their new sustainable development project for months. James's father nearly fell out of his chair when he saw Nathan actually showed up tonight." I crossed my arms. "And this concerns me how, exactly?" Olivia sighed dramatically. "Because he's been talking exclusively to you all night instead of networking with James's family like he's supposed to be doing. Everyone's noticed." "I didn't realize my dinner conversation was part of your wedding strategy," I said, trying to keep the edge from my voice. "Should I have received a briefing along with my table assignment?" "Don't be difficult," she snapped. "This is important to James's family. Just try to include others in your conversation, okay? Or better yet, I can have James introduce Nathan to his father's business partners." I felt a familiar sensation. The shrinking, the diminishment that happened whenever I spent too much time with my family. No matter what I accomplished in my professional life, here I was still the awkward sister who needed to be managed. "Fine," I said flatly. "I'll redirect him to the important people." Olivia's expression softened slightly. "It's not that you're not important, Maya. It's just that this is a big opportunity for the Crawfords, and it's my wedding day." "I understand," I said, though what I understood was something different entirely. "You should get back to your guests. I'll be out in a minute." When she left, I stood alone in the ornate room, surrounded by the evidence of Olivia's perfect day. The designer dress hanging on a padded hanger, the professional photos already printed and displayed, the mountain of gifts piled in the corner. Everything exactly as it should be, exactly as everyone expected. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and returned to the garden. The string quartet had resumed playing, and couples were beginning to drift toward the dance floor. Nathan was still at our table, now in conversation with the foundation woman. As I approached, he looked up with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased to see me. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said, retaking my seat. "Just sister stuff," like she said. He studied me for a moment. "You know, I have a terrible confession to make." "What's that?" I asked, suddenly wary. "I recognized your name as soon as you introduced yourself. You wrote that case study on digital resilience during market disruptions that was published in Harvard Business Review last year." I blinked in surprise. "You read that?" "I've referenced it in at least 3 board meetings," he said. "Your analysis of how traditional companies can leverage their established trust while adopting new technologies was brilliant. It's rare to find someone who understands both the human and technical sides of transformation." For a moment, I couldn't speak. In my professional world, that article had indeed received significant attention. But here, in my family's orbit, no one had even mentioned it. My parents had always viewed my career as a placeholder until I found the right man and settled into a real life. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means a lot coming from you." He leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something? What brings you to Seattle? The tech scene there is growing, but with your expertise, I would have expected to find you in San Francisco or New York." "I was in San Francisco originally," I explained, "but I moved to Seattle 3 years ago to join Axiom Consulting. They offered me the chance to build their digital strategy practice from the ground up." "Axiom?" His eyebrows rose. "They're doing impressive work, but wait," he paused, connecting the dots. "If you're building their practice, that would make you senior partner and head of digital transformation," I confirmed, saying the title I rarely mentioned around family, because it inevitably led to comments about my intimidating career. Nathan sat back, looking genuinely impressed. "Now I feel privileged to be sitting at the back table with you." Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance to the garden caught everyone's attention. The quartet stopped playing mid-song, and heads turned toward the stone archway where a distinguished older couple had just arrived. "Who is that?" I asked, noticing how the entire Crawford family was rushing to greet the newcomers. "Eleanor and Richard Whitmore," Nathan replied quietly. "They practically built modern San Francisco. Old money, major philanthropists, and notoriously selective about their social engagements. I'm surprised they're here." We watched as James's parents ushered the Whitmores toward the head table with an almost comical level of deference. Olivia was quickly summoned from the dance floor, her expression shifting from momentary annoyance to practiced charm as she was introduced. "The Crawfords have been trying to get the Whitmores' support for their development projects for years," Nathan continued. "Richard sits on the City Planning Commission, and Eleanor chairs 3 major foundation boards. Their approval essentially guarantees success in this circle." I observed the careful choreography from a distance, the solicitous smiles, the strategic positioning of family members, the obvious importance being placed on impressing these unexpected guests. Nathan checked his watch. "I should probably make an appearance and say hello. Richard and I serve on a technology ethics board together." "Of course," I said, preparing for the end of our conversation. "It was nice talking with you." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Would you like to join me? I'd be happy to introduce you." The invitation caught me off guard. In my family's social hierarchy, I was never the one invited into important circles. "I wouldn't want to intrude on the family's moment," I said hesitantly. "Trust me," he replied with a small smile. "They'll be too focused on the Whitmores to notice who I bring along. Against my better judgment, and definitely against what Olivia would want, I accepted." As we walked together toward the front of the garden, I could feel eyes tracking our movement. My mother's gaze was particularly sharp, her confusion evident even from a distance. We paused at the edge of the small crowd that had formed around the Whitmores, waiting for an appropriate moment to step forward. I could see Olivia speaking animatedly, her hands moving in that graceful way she had practiced since childhood. James's father kept nodding emphatically at whatever Richard Whitmore was saying. Then, unexpectedly, Richard glanced past them and noticed Nathan. His serious expression immediately warmed. "Nathan Reed," he called out, effectively silencing the Crawfords mid-sentence. "I didn't expect to see you here." The crowd parted automatically as Nathan moved forward, with me following slightly behind. "Richard, Eleanor," he greeted them warmly. "Wonderful to see you both." "We've just been discussing your latest initiative with the governor," Eleanor said, completely ignoring the Crawfords now. "Fascinating approach to public-private partnerships in technology education." "Thank you," Nathan replied modestly. "It's still in the early stages, but we're optimistic." He turned slightly, gesturing toward me. "I'd like to introduce you to Maya Winters. She's the senior partner for digital transformation at Axiom Consulting." Richard Whitmore's attention shifted to me, with new interest. "Axiom? Aren't they the firm behind the healthcare accessibility platform for rural communities?" "Yes," I confirmed, surprised he was familiar with it. "That's one of our flagship projects." "Remarkable work," he said, extending his hand. "I was just reading about the impact metrics. Over 2 million people with new access to medical consultations in the first year alone, wasn't it?" 2.3 million, I corrected gently, shaking his hand. "We've been focused on scalable solutions that don't require extensive infrastructure." Eleanor joined the conversation. "I'd love to hear more about that. We've been funding similar initiatives internationally, but struggling with the technology implementation." As we began discussing the challenges of digital healthcare delivery, I became aware of the stunned silence around us. From the corner of my eye, I could see Olivia's frozen smile and the confused expressions of James's parents. My mother had somehow materialized at the edge of the group, her eyes darting between me and the Whitmores as though witnessing something incomprehensible. For the next 15 minutes, the four of us, Nathan, the Whitmores, and myself, remained deep in conversation, while the Crawford family hovered uncertainly nearby, occasionally attempting to interject, but mostly watching with increasing confusion as the guests of honor engaged with the bride's overlooked sister. "Maya," Eleanor finally said, "we're hosting a symposium on technology ethics next month. I think your perspective would be invaluable. Would you be willing to join our panel on equitable access?" Before I could respond, Olivia stepped forward with a bright laugh. "Oh, Maya's schedule is always so busy with her work, but I'm sure she's flattered by the invitation." It was the same tone she had used since childhood whenever attention briefly shifted my way, the subtle redirection, the implied dismissal of my abilities or interests. I smiled directly at Eleanor. "Actually, I'd be honored to participate. Please have your office send me the details." Richard nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Nathan can share your contact information with us." He checked his watch. "Eleanor, we should make our appearance at the governor's reception before it ends." "Of course," she agreed, then turned to Olivia and James. "Congratulations on your wedding." "Everything is lovely." With polite nods to the assembled family members, they prepared to depart. But before leaving, Richard did something unexpected. He reached out and shook my hand again, holding it slightly longer than necessary. "It was a genuine pleasure meeting you, Ms. Winters," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent garden. "Your work is making a real difference. We need more leaders like you." With that, they departed, leaving behind a vacuum of stunned silence. Nathan excused himself to walk them out, promising to return shortly. As soon as they were out of earshot, Olivia grabbed my arm, her nails digging slightly into my skin. "What was that?" she hissed. "A conversation," I replied calmly, gently removing her hand. "You completely took over their attention." Her voice was low but intense. "This was supposed to be about James's family's project, not your work." James's father was staring at me like I'd performed some incomprehensible magic trick. "How do you know the Whitmores?" he demanded. "I don't," I said honestly. "We just met." "And Nathan Reed?" my mother interjected, having moved close enough to join the interrogation. "How do you know him?" We were seated at the same table, I explained, maintaining my composure despite the circle of accusatory faces. We just started talking. About what? Olivia pressed. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never fully recognized before. Behind her perfect makeup and practiced smile was fear. Fear that she might not be the most important person in the room. Fear that the narrative she'd constructed about our respective places in the world might not be entirely accurate. About work, I said simply. My work. Before anyone could respond, Nathan returned, seemingly oblivious to the tension. Richard asked me to give you his card, he said, handing me an embossed business card. He rarely does that, by the way. The small white rectangle felt disproportionately heavy in my hand, a tangible symbol of recognition from someone whose opinion apparently mattered in this world. Thank you, I said, tucking it into my clutch. Nathan glanced around at the strained faces surrounding us. Did I interrupt something? Not at all, I assured him, suddenly feeling exhausted by the entire evening. But I think I should probably head out soon. I have an early flight back to Seattle tomorrow. I'll walk you to your car, he offered immediately. Maya, Olivia began, her tone a mixture of annoyance and confusion. The reception isn't over. There's still the cake cutting and… I've had a lovely time, I interrupted gently. But I think we both know my presence isn't essential for the rest of the evening. For once, she had no ready response. James's father was still staring at me like I'd suddenly materialized from another dimension, while my mother seemed torn between disapproval and bewilderment. I hugged Olivia briefly. Congratulations again. I wish you both every happiness. With that, I turned and walked away from the family circle, Nathan falling into step beside me. We moved through the garden in silence, past the twinkling lights and curious glances, toward the stone path that led to the parking area. The night air had cooled considerably, and I wished I'd brought a wrap. As if reading my thoughts, Nathan removed his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. The gesture was so naturally courteous that I accepted without protest. I feel like I may have created some complications for you, he said as we reached the quieter area beyond the garden. I laughed softly. Trust me, those complications have been years in the making. You just happened to witness one scene in a very long play. We reached my rental car, parked at the far end of the lot. I turned to face him, suddenly reluctant to end our conversation but unsure what else to say. Maya, he began, his expression thoughtful. I have a proposition for you. A proposition? I echoed, immediately wary. He smiled. A professional one. Horizon Ventures is expanding our focus on transformative technologies in healthcare and education. Exactly the areas where you've demonstrated exceptional expertise. We're assembling an advisory board to guide our investment strategy. I'd like you to consider joining us. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Horizon Ventures was known for working with the most innovative minds in technology. Their advisory positions were coveted in the industry. Why me? I asked finally. Because you understand something most technologists don't, that successful digital transformation isn't just about the technology. It's about people, culture, and sustainable change. He paused. I've followed your work for over a year. Tonight just confirmed what I already suspected, that you're exactly the kind of thinker we need. I tried to process this information. You knew who I was before we met? He nodded. Your case studies are required reading for our portfolio companies. When I saw your name on the wedding invitation list, I actually decided to attend, specifically hoping to meet you. The revelation was disorienting. All evening, I'd felt like the outsider, the afterthought, while unknowingly being the reason this influential investor had come to my sister's wedding at all. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to decide now, he assured me. Take my card, think about it. We can discuss the details over dinner when you're back in the city. As he handed me his business card, the second I'd received that evening, our fingers briefly touched. The contact sent an unexpected current through me, a reminder that beneath this professional exchange was a human connection, that had felt surprisingly easy and natural. "Thank you," I said, tucking his card beside Richard Whitmore's. "I'll definitely think about it." He stepped back as I unlocked my car. "One more thing, Maya." I looked up questioningly. "Your family doesn't see you clearly," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But others do. Remember that." With those words hanging in the cool night air, he turned and walked back toward the reception, leaving me standing beside my rental car, with his jacket still draped around my shoulders and a new possibility unfolding before me. As I drove away from the estate, the lights of the wedding reception receding in my rearview mirror, I felt something shift inside me, not just professionally, but personally. For years I had measured myself through my family's limited perspective, accepting their narrative about who I was and what I could become. Tonight, that narrative had been challenged by someone who saw value in exactly the parts of me my family had dismissed. And in that recognition, I found a new kind of freedom, not from their judgment, but from the power it had held over me. I reached for my phone at a stoplight and called my assistant in Seattle. "Claire? It's Maya. I need you to clear my calendar for the symposium on technology ethics next month." "Yes, it's important. Very important." The road ahead stretched into darkness, but for the first time in years, I felt certain of my direction. I arrived at my hotel room just after midnight, my mind still buzzing from the evening's unexpected turn of events. The jade pendant that had been my only accessory now rested on the bedside table while I sat cross-legged on the king-sized bed, 2 business cards placed before me like talismans from another world. Richard Whitmore's heavy cream card with embossed lettering. Nathan Reed's sleek, minimalist design in matte black. Both representing opportunities I hadn't anticipated when I reluctantly drove to my sister's wedding reception just hours earlier. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "We need to talk before you leave tomorrow." I set it aside without responding. Whatever conversation she wanted to have could wait until morning. Tonight belonged to this strange new feeling growing inside me. A sense of possibility I hadn't allowed myself to experience in years. I picked up Nathan's card again, running my finger along the raised letters of his name. He had recognized my work. More than that, he had sought me out because of it. The thought was still difficult to process after years of having my professional accomplishments treated as curious hobbies by my family. Sleep came slowly that night, my dreams filled with echoes of conversations and faces watching me from across crowded rooms. When morning arrived, I woke to 3 missed calls from my mother and another text from Olivia asking what time we could meet before my flight. I responded with a simple message. Breakfast at the hotel restaurant 8:30. Then I showered, dressed in slim black pants and a deep green blouse that brought out the color of my eyes, and headed downstairs to prepare for whatever confrontation awaited me. The restaurant was nearly empty when I arrived. I chose a table near the windows overlooking the vineyard, ordered coffee, and waited. At precisely 8:30, Olivia appeared, looking remarkably fresh despite what must have been a late night of celebration. She wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, diamond studs glinting at her ears. "You're leaving your jacket in the car?" she asked by way of greeting, glancing at my bare shoulders. "I don't have a jacket," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "I didn't bring one." She slid into the seat opposite me. "Then whose jacket were you wearing when you left last night, the charcoal one?" "Ah. So that's what this was about." "Nathan Reed's," I said simply. "He loaned it to me because it was cold. I'll have it shipped back to him." Her eyes narrowed slightly. That was thoughtful of him. A server approached to take her order. Just herbal tea, no food, before disappearing again. "So," I began, "what did you want to talk about?" Quote. Olivia folded her hands on the table, a gesture so reminiscent of our mother that I nearly smiled. "What exactly happened last night, Maya? One minute you're sitting at the back table where no one will notice you, and the next you're the center of attention with the Whitmores and Nathan Reed." The accusatory tone in her voice was unmistakable, as though I'd somehow cheated at a game we'd been playing. "Nothing happened," I said. "Nathan and I were seated at the same table. We talked about work. He knew who I was because he'd read my case studies. When the Whitmores arrived, he introduced me to them." "That's all?" "That's all?" she repeated incredulously. Maya, do you have any idea who these people are? The Crawfords have been trying to get the Whitmores' attention for years, and Nathan Reed never attends events like this. James's father couldn't believe it when he RSVP'd. I spread my napkin across my lap, buying time before responding. I'm gathering they're important in certain circles. Certain circles? She leaned forward, lowering her voice despite the empty restaurant. Richard Whitmore practically controls half the development projects in San Francisco, with his position on the Planning Commission. Eleanor's foundations fund every major cultural institution in the city. And Nathan Reed? He's turned down dinner invitations from tech CEOs and senators. But somehow he spent my entire wedding reception talking to you. The mixture of confusion and resentment in her voice was so familiar, the same tone she'd used when my SAT scores came in higher than hers, when I received the fellowship she'd also applied for, when any moment threatened the narrative that she was the successful sister, while I was the socially awkward one who prioritized work over relationships. I don't know what to tell you, Olivia, I said honestly. We had a good conversation. They seemed interested in my work. Your work, she repeated flatly. What did you tell them about me? The question caught me off guard. About you? Nothing. Why would I? She sat back, clearly unsatisfied with my response. Mom said you're speaking at some symposium now? Yes. Eleanor Whitmore invited me to participate in a panel on technology ethics. And what exactly do you know about technology ethics? I set my coffee cup down carefully. My team designed the ethical framework for the healthcare accessibility platform that serves over 2 million people in rural communities. We developed protocols for data privacy that have been adopted as industry standards. My last 3 published case studies focused on the ethical implications of algorithmic decision-making in vulnerable populations. Olivia blinked, momentarily silenced. I realized with a start that she had no idea what I actually did. In her mind, I had some vague technology job that kept me busy and unmarried. The details had never interested her enough to ask. Her tea arrived, and she busied herself with the lemon slice, avoiding my eyes. Olivia, I said more gently, why does this bother you so much? It was your wedding day. You married into an incredible family. You had everyone's attention and admiration. Why does it matter that I had one good professional conversation? She stirred her tea slowly, the spoon clinking against fine china. When she finally looked up, I was surprised to see genuine confusion in her eyes. Because it's not how things are supposed to be, she said, her voice smaller now. You're the smart one who doesn't fit in. I'm the one who knows how to handle people. That's how it's always been. The stark honesty of her statement hit me with unexpected force. All these years, she'd been as trapped in our prescribed roles as I had been. Comfortable in hers, perhaps, but trapped nonetheless. Maybe it's time we both reconsider those assumptions, I suggested quietly. She shook her head. You don't understand. James's parents were asking me questions about you all morning. His father wants to know if you'd consult on their development project. His mother asked if you'd be at their dinner party next month. Her voice cracked slightly. They never ask about me like that. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Olivia, you just married the man you love. You're building a life with him. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Yes, but... She withdrew her hand. I've worked so hard to be the perfect daughter, the perfect fiancée, now the perfect wife. I've done everything right. And then you walk in, not even trying, and suddenly you're the interesting one? Quote. The raw vulnerability in her voice transported me back to our childhood. Olivia, 2 years older, always performing dance recitals, piano concerts, student council speeches, while I sat quietly with books, building worlds in my mind that no one else could see. I have been trying, I said softly, just at different things than you. Things our family never valued as much as the path you chose. She looked out the window, blinking rapidly. Do you know what Dad said to me this morning? That he had no idea you were so accomplished. After 34 years, he had no idea. The revelation stung despite its familiarity. That's not your fault, Olivia. Isn't it? She turned back to me. I've spent years telling everyone how different we are. How I'm the practical one while you're lost in your career. I never once actually asked what you were building. Her admission hung between us, unexpected and disarming. In all our adult interactions, I'd cast her as the favored daughter who deliberately diminished me. I'd never considered that she might be protecting a narrative she needed as desperately as our parents did. Maybe we both made assumptions we shouldn't have, I offered. She nodded slightly, then reached for her purse. I should go. James is waiting. We're having brunch with his family before heading to the airport. She paused. When's your flight back to Seattle? 3 o'clock. She stood, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her jeans. Will you be back in San Francisco anytime soon? The question contained something I'd never heard from her before, a tentative invitation. Actually, I might be, I said, thinking of Nathan's advisory board proposition. I'll let you know when I have dates. She nodded again, seeming uncertain how to end our conversation. Finally, she just said, "Safe travels, Maya," and turned to leave. Olivia? I called after her. She looked back questioningly. Congratulations again. I really am happy for you. A small smile touched her lips. Not the practiced one she'd worn throughout the wedding festivities, but something more genuine. Thank you, she said, and then she was gone. I remained at the table, finishing my coffee and ordering a proper breakfast. The conversation with Olivia had left me feeling oddly unsettled, neither victorious nor defeated, but somewhere in the complex middle ground, where real human relationships exist. As I waited for my food, I pulled out my phone and opened my email. There, among the usual work correspondences, was a message that had arrived sometime during the night. The sender, Nathan Reed. The subject line, Advisory Board, Initial Details. I opened it, my pulse quickening slightly as I read, Maya, it was a genuine pleasure meeting you last night. As discussed, I'm attaching information about the advisory position with Horizon Ventures. The board meets quarterly in San Francisco, with additional virtual sessions as needed. The first in-person meeting is scheduled for next month, coinciding with Eleanor Whitmore's symposium. I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss this further over dinner when you're next in the city. Just let me know what works for your schedule. Regardless of your decision about the board position, I enjoyed our conversation and hope our professional paths cross again soon. Best regards. Nathan. Attached was a PDF outlining the advisory role, the responsibilities, compensation, substantially more generous than I'd anticipated, and profiles of the other board members. It was an impressive group. Former tech executives, academic leaders, and social entrepreneurs, each bringing unique expertise to the table. I set my phone down as my breakfast arrived, suddenly ravenous. As I ate, I gazed out at the vineyards stretching toward the horizon. The morning sun illuminated rows of grapevines, their leaves shimmering with dew. Workers moved methodically between them, their practiced hands knowing exactly which grapes were ready for harvest. For years, I'd felt like I was growing in the wrong soil, surrounded by family who didn't understand or value what I was cultivating. But perhaps the issue wasn't the soil itself, just that I'd been looking for validation in places unlikely to provide it. After breakfast, I returned to my room to pack. As I folded Nathan's jacket to place in my carry-on, I noticed a business card had fallen from the inner pocket. But it wasn't his. This one belonged to Eleanor Whitmore with a handwritten note on the back. Looking forward to your contribution at the symposium. Please call my assistant to arrange details. At the rental car return, I checked my phone one last time before heading into the terminal. A new email had arrived from Richard Whitmore's assistant, with details about the commission and a personal note. Mr. Whitmore specifically requested your participation and asked me to arrange accommodations whenever you're in San Francisco for meetings. I scrolled further and found another message, this one from Nathan Reed's executive assistant, confirming receipt of my acceptance email, which I hadn't yet sent, and suggesting several dates for dinner to discuss the advisory role. Acceptance email? I checked my sent folder and found nothing. Confused, I continued to the terminal, checked in for my flight, and made my way through security. It wasn't until I was settled at my gate that the mystery was solved. A text message from Olivia appeared on my screen. I hope you don't mind. I told Nathan you'd definitely be interested in the advisory position. He seemed pleased. Consider it my wedding gift to you. I stared at the message, unsure whether to be annoyed at her presumption or touched by the unexpected gesture. After our conversation at breakfast, it felt like an olive branch, her way of acknowledging my professional value when she'd spent years dismissing it. I typed back, "Bold move, but thank you. I was going to accept anyway." Her response came quickly. "I figured. You never could resist a good challenge." Safe travels, sis. As I boarded my flight back to Seattle, I realized something fundamental had shifted. For years, I defined myself partly in opposition to my family's expectations. The daughter who chose a different path, who prioritized professional fulfillment over their definition of personal success. But in doing so, I'd inadvertently granted them power over my narrative. The events of the past 24 hours had shown me a different possibility, one where I could be recognized and valued for exactly who I was, without needing either their approval or their disapproval to define me. I settled into my seat and gazed out the window as the plane taxied toward the runway. Below us stretched the city where I'd grown up, where I'd first discovered my passion for technology, and where I'd eventually felt the need to leave to fully become myself. Now, life was drawing me back, not to the family dynamics I'd escaped, but to professional opportunities that validated the path I'd chosen. As the plane lifted into the air, I made a decision. I would accept both offers, Nathan's advisory board and Richard Whitmore's commission. I would return to San Francisco regularly, building a new relationship with the city on my own terms. And, perhaps in time, a new relationship with my family as well. One based on who we actually were, not who we'd always assumed each other to be. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and I reached for my laptop. If I was going to step into these new roles, I needed to prepare. Opening a new document, I began outlining ideas for the Technology Ethics Panel. Approaches to ensuring digital accessibility for vulnerable populations, frameworks for ethical decision-making and algorithm development, strategies for balancing innovation with social responsibility. The words flowed easily, my thoughts crystallizing with new clarity. This was who I was, not the awkward sister who didn't fit, but a woman with expertise, vision, and the growing confidence to share both with the world. By the time we began our descent into Seattle, I drafted a comprehensive outline for my panel presentation and sketched initial thoughts for the Infrastructure Commission. I'd also composed emails accepting both positions, scheduled to send as soon as we landed. As the wheels touched down, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I wasn't carrying the weight of being the family disappointment. Instead, I was stepping into a future shaped by my own choices, and recognized on its own merits. Seattle greeted me with its characteristic misty rain as I exited the airport and hailed a rideshare. The driver loaded my suitcase into the trunk, and I settled into the back seat for the journey to my downtown apartment. "Good trip?" he asked, making conversation as we merged onto the highway. I thought about the wedding I'd dreaded attending, the family dynamics I'd been prepared to endure, and the unexpected turn of events that had transformed the experience into something entirely different. "Better than I expected," I replied, watching raindrops trace patterns on the window. "Much better than I expected." As we drove through the gray Seattle afternoon, I found myself looking forward rather than back to the symposium next month, to quarterly meetings in San Francisco, to building something meaningful that reached far beyond my family's limited understanding of success. Nathan's words from the previous night echoed in my mind. "Your family doesn't see you clearly, but others do. Remember that." I would remember, and more importantly, I would move forward with the knowledge that the most significant validation doesn't come from those who've known us the longest, but from those who truly see us for who we are and what we can contribute. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from Nathan Reed himself rather than his assistant. The subject line read simply, "Looking forward to working with you." I smiled and slipped the phone back into my bag. The future was opening in unexpected ways, and for once, I was ready to embrace every possibility it offered, not as Olivia's awkward sister or my parents' puzzling daughter, but simply as Maya Winters, exactly as I was meant to be. 1 month after my sister's wedding, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my hotel suite in San Francisco, watching fog roll beneath the Golden Gate Bridge. The city sprawled below me, a place I'd once fled but was now welcoming me back on entirely different terms. On the desk behind me lay my presentation materials for Eleanor Whitmore's Technology Ethics Symposium, speaking notes, visual aids, and background research on the other panelists. Beside them rested the leather portfolio Nathan had sent as a welcome gift when I officially joined Horizon Ventures Advisory Board, embossed with my initials in subtle gold lettering. My phone chimed with a calendar alert. Symposium preparation breakfast, 8:30 a.m. I smoothed the front of my charcoal gray dress, slipped on the jade pendant that had become something of a talisman, and headed downstairs. The hotel restaurant had been reserved exclusively for symposium speakers. As I entered, I spotted Eleanor Whitmore at a center table, engaged in animated conversation with two distinguished-looking men. She glanced up, noticed me, and immediately waved me over. "Maya, perfect timing." She rose slightly to greet me. "We were just discussing your healthcare accessibility platform. The implementation metrics are remarkable." I shook hands with the men, the dean of a prestigious medical school, and the CEO of a healthcare technology company, before taking the empty seat Eleanor indicated. "Thank you," I said. Though I should clarify that it was a team effort. My role was primarily in designing the digital transformation strategy. "Don't diminish your contribution," the CEO said. "I've studied your approach. The integration of human-centered design with scalable technology infrastructure was brilliant. Most technologists focus on one or the other." Before I could respond, a familiar voice spoke from behind me. "That's exactly why I recruited her for our advisory board." I turned to find Nathan Reed standing there, looking impeccable in a navy suit that somehow managed to appear both professional and effortlessly casual. The same quality I'd noticed at the wedding, of being completely comfortable in his own skin, was even more apparent in this professional setting. "Nathan," Eleanor greeted him warmly, "I didn't realize you'd be joining us this morning." "I wouldn't miss Maya's symposium debut," he replied, taking the empty seat beside me. "Plus, I'm meeting with potential portfolio companies this afternoon." Efficient trip. As the conversation flowed around the table, I marveled at how naturally I seemed to fit into this world of thought leaders and decision-makers. These people valued precisely the qualities my family had always found puzzling: my analytical mind, my focus on innovation, my commitment to technology as a tool for social good. After breakfast, Eleanor pulled me aside. "You seem surprised by the reception you're receiving," she observed perceptively. I smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there." She adjusted her elegant scarf. "Many of us who've achieved success in non-traditional fields have experienced that moment of realizing we've been seeking validation from the wrong audience." Her insight struck a chord. "That's exactly it. I spent years trying to make my family understand the value of my work, when I should have been connecting with people who already recognize it." Eleanor nodded. "Your family may never fully understand what you do, Maya. Mine certainly doesn't. My brother still introduces me as Eleanor who runs some charity thing, despite my foundation's managing over $1 billion in philanthropic investments." We both laughed at the familiar frustration. "The symposium begins in an hour," she continued. "Are you ready?" I took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You'll be magnificent," she assured me. "Just remember, you're not here because of who you know. You're here because of what you know." With those words bolstering my confidence, I headed to the grand ballroom where the symposium would take place. Attendees were already filing in: technology executives, academic researchers, policy experts, and social entrepreneurs, all gathered to discuss the ethical dimensions of emerging technologies. My panel was scheduled first: ensuring equitable access in the digital age. As I took my place on the stage alongside the other panelists, I scanned the audience and was surprised to spot a familiar face in the third row. My father, dressed in an uncharacteristically formal suit, sat stiffly between two younger men in casual tech attire. Our eyes met briefly before I looked away, unsettled by his unexpected presence. Had my mother told him about the symposium? Or had he found out some other way? I had no time to wonder as the moderator began introductions. When my turn came, he described me as one of the leading voices in humanizing digital transformation, and cited my case studies as essential reading for anyone working at the intersection of technology and social impact. The discussion that followed was energetic and substantive. I spoke about the healthcare platform, about digital literacy challenges in underserved communities, about the responsibility of technologists to consider access barriers in their design processes. The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions and building on each other's points. When I described our approach to community-based design, bringing rural healthcare workers into the development process from the beginning rather than designing for them from afar, the room erupted in spontaneous applause. That's the fundamental shift we need, I concluded. Technology should be shaped by the wisdom of those who will use it, not just the expertise of those who create it. As the panel ended, attendees swarmed the stage with follow-up questions and business cards. Through the crowd, I caught glimpses of my father still seated, watching the proceedings with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Eventually, the crowd thinned as people moved toward the refreshment area for the mid-morning break. I gathered my notes, preparing to join them when I looked up to find my father standing before me. "Maya," he said, his voice carrying its usual formality but with an undertone of something new. Uncertainty, perhaps. "Dad," I replied, surprised. "I didn't know you were coming." He adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. "Your mother forwarded me the information about the symposium. I thought I should see what you do." The admission cost him something. I could see it in the slight tightening around his eyes. "What did you think?" I asked, genuinely curious about his impression. He glanced around at the impressive venue, the influential attendees, the program listing my name alongside recognized experts. "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" He shrugged slightly. "Something more. Technical, I suppose. Computer coding and such. Not all this talk about human impact and ethical responsibility." I smiled despite myself. "That's exactly what digital transformation is, Dad. It's not just about the technology. It's about how technology changes human systems and experiences." He nodded slowly. "You spoke well, confidently." People seemed impressed. Coming from my father, this was extraordinary praise. "Thank you for coming," I said, meaning it. "Would you like to stay for the reception? I could introduce you to some colleagues." He checked his watch, another familiar gesture. "I have a client meeting at noon, but perhaps we could have dinner? Your mother and I are staying at the Marriott downtown." The invitation surprised me. "I'd like that," I said. "I have the advisory board dinner tonight, but I'm free tomorrow evening." "Tomorrow, then," he agreed. "Your mother will be pleased." As he turned to leave, he hesitated, then added, "I read your case studies, the ones you sent. I didn't understand all the technical details, but I could see that what you're doing is important." Before I could respond, he was gone, moving with purpose through the crowd toward the exit. I stood there a moment, processing what had just occurred. My father, who had spent years questioning my career choices, who had never understood why I prioritized professional growth over the traditional path he valued, had made the effort not only to read my work, but to attend this symposium and acknowledge its significance. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation or a complete transformation of our relationship, but it was a step, one I hadn't anticipated and couldn't have demanded. That looked intense. Nathan's voice broke into my thoughts as he approached from the side of the stage. "Family." "My father," I confirmed. He showed up unexpectedly. "Ah." Nathan's expression was understanding. The first time my parents attended one of my keynotes, my father asked afterward if I was still doing that internet thing. This was after my company went public. I laughed, grateful for his lightness. "Mine just invited me to dinner tomorrow night." "I think that's progress." "Definite progress," he agreed. "Now, are you ready for the next phase of your triumphant return to San Francisco? The Horizon Advisory Dinner is at 7, but I thought you might want to see our new offices first. They're just a few blocks from here." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of networking conversations, session attendance, and preparations for the evening's advisory board dinner. Throughout it all, I felt a growing sense of alignment, as though the pieces of my professional and personal identity were finally clicking into place. Horizon Ventures offices occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek tower in the financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the bay, while the interior featured an intentional blend of collaborative spaces and private work areas. Unlike many venture capital firms that projected wealth through ostentatious decor, Horizon's aesthetic was understated and purposeful, much like Nathan himself. "Most of our team works hybridly," he explained as he showed me around. "But we've designed the space to make in-person collaboration especially valuable." In one corner, a group of analysts huddled around a whiteboard covered in flowcharts. In another, 2 partners conducted a video call with entrepreneurs whose faces were projected on a wall-sized screen. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, in this moment, I was exactly where I belonged. Standing in my own power, neither defined by family expectations nor in rebellion against them, but simply and completely myself. The next morning dawned clear and bright, San Francisco's famous fog having retreated temporarily to reveal a city gleaming in sunlight. I dressed carefully for lunch with Nathan and the founder he wanted me to meet, choosing a structured blazer in deep teal over a simple silk shell, professional but distinctly my own style, rather than the muted corporate palette I'd often hidden behind. As I fastened my grandmother's jade pendant around my neck, my phone chimed with a text from Nathan: "Car downstairs in 15 minutes. Looking forward to introducing you to Sophia." The black Tesla that arrived was driven by Nathan himself rather than a hired car service. Another subtle difference that spoke to his unassuming approach despite his considerable success. He greeted me with a warm smile as I slid into the passenger seat. "I hope you don't mind a slight detour before lunch," he said as we pulled into traffic. "Sophia's incubator space is in a converted warehouse in Dogpatch. I thought you might appreciate seeing where the magic happens before we talk specifics." "I'd love that," I replied, genuinely interested in seeing a startup environment outside the glossy tech campuses that dominated the industry. We drove through the city, past the familiar skyscrapers of the financial district, and into the more industrial neighborhood that had become home to artists, makers, and startups seeking affordable space. The warehouse Nathan eventually parked beside looked unremarkable from the outside. Weathered brick with large factory windows, the only indication of its current purpose, a small sign reading, "Catalyst Commons." Inside, however, was a revelation. The vast open space had been thoughtfully divided into zones without walls. Collaborative areas with whiteboards and comfortable seating, focused work pods with sound-dampening features, a central kitchen where people gathered around a long communal table, and glass-fronted prototype labs where teams tinkered with hardware components. Horizon funds the Commons as a shared workspace for early-stage companies we believe in, Nathan explained as we walked through. They get subsidized rent, access to prototyping equipment, and most importantly, proximity to each other. Some of our most successful ventures began as collisions between founders who happened to be making coffee at the same time. The space hummed with focused energy, not the artificial hustle culture prominent in some startup environments, but genuine engagement with meaningful work. People looked up from their projects to wave at Nathan, their greetings casual but respectful. "Nathan!" A woman in her early 30s approached us, her curly hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes bright with intelligence. Perfect timing. We just finished the rural library pilot test data. "Maya, this is Sophia Chen," Nathan introduced us, "founder of LearnPath, and the person I've been eager for you to meet." We shook hands, and I immediately sensed the focused intensity that successful founders often radiate. "I've been following your work on the healthcare platform," Sophia said, "particularly your approach to designing for limited connectivity environments. We're facing similar challenges with rural educational access." She led us to a corner workspace where screens displayed maps, analytics dashboards, and user interface mock-ups. LearnPath creates digital skills training programs that work in low-resource environments, she explained. The technology itself isn't particularly revolutionary. The innovation is in the delivery model. For the next 20 minutes, Sophia walked me through her approach, a blend of offline-capable apps, community-based facilitation, and culturally relevant curriculum design. The challenges she described resonated deeply with my own experience developing the healthcare platform. "Your biggest obstacle isn't technical, is it?" I observed. Its adoption and integration into existing community structures. Her eyes lit up. Exactly. Everyone focuses on the bandwidth limitations or device constraints, but those are solvable engineering problems. The real challenge is creating something that fits naturally into the lives and cultural contexts of the people we're trying to serve. That's why I wanted you two to meet, Nathan interjected. Maya, Horizon is considering a significant investment in LearnPath's next expansion phase, but Sophia's team needs strategic guidance on scaling their community integration model. It sounded exactly like the challenge you navigated with the healthcare platform. I nodded, immediately seeing the parallels and potential. The key is to create a replicable framework while allowing for local adaptation. Not a franchise model, but more like a pattern language that local implementers can customize. Yes, Sophia exclaimed. That's exactly what we're trying to articulate. She turned to Nathan. You are right. She gets it. The three of us continued our conversation over lunch at a nearby restaurant, a casual farm-to-table place where the staff greeted Nathan by name but without fuss. As we discussed the specifics of LearnPath's expansion strategy, I found myself drawing on experiences and insights from my years of consulting work, but with a freedom I rarely felt with clients. What if, I suggested as we finished our main course, you created community implementation teams, modeled after open-source development communities, local adapters who share their modifications and improvements back to the central platform, creating a constantly evolving knowledge base? Sophia paused, fork midair. That's brilliant. It solves both the standardization and customization problems simultaneously. She began sketching the concept on her napkin, adding nodes and connections as the idea took shape. Nathan watched our exchange with evident satisfaction. This is exactly the kind of cross-pollination I hoped would happen, he said. Sophia's educational expertise combined with Maya's digital transformation experience. By the time lunch concluded, Sophia and I had outlined a framework for LearnPath's community integration strategy that addressed both immediate implementation challenges and long-term scaling considerations. We'd also discovered a shared passion for democratizing access to digital skills that transcended professional interests. I can't thank you enough, Sophia said as we prepared to leave. Would you be willing to continue this conversation? Perhaps as an advisor to LearnPath? I glanced at Nathan, who smiled encouragingly. I think that could be arranged as part of your advisory board role with Horizon, he suggested. If you're interested, of course. I'd be delighted, I replied, realizing how energized I felt by the prospect of helping shape LearnPath's development. This wasn't just consulting work. It was contributing to something with potential for genuine social impact. As Nathan drove me back to my hotel, I found myself reflecting on how different this professional engagement felt from the corporate projects that typically filled my calendar. Thank you for introducing me to Sophia and LearnPath, I said. Their work aligns perfectly with what I believe technology should do. I thought it might, he replied. When I read your case studies, particularly your emphasis on human-centered design, I immediately saw the connection with Sophia's approach. Horizon doesn't just invest in technologies. We invest in visions for how technology can transform lives for the better. We pulled up to my hotel, but neither of us moved to end the conversation immediately. I know you have dinner with your parents tonight, Nathan said, but I was wondering if you might be free tomorrow before your flight. The board doesn't formally meet until next month, but I'd value your input on a couple of other potential investments we're considering. My flight's not until the evening, I replied. I'd be happy to meet tomorrow. He smiled. Excellent. Why don't you come by the office around 10? We can work through lunch if that suits your schedule. As I stepped out of the car, he added, and Maya, good luck tonight. Family dinners can be complicated territory. I laughed softly. That might be the understatement of the year, but thank you. Back in my suite, I had a few hours before meeting my parents for dinner. Time to review emails, check in with my team in Seattle, and prepare mentally for the evening ahead. The symposium had concluded successfully. The advisory board dinner had confirmed I was in the right place professionally, and the meeting with Sophia had opened exciting new possibilities. Only the dinner with my parents remained as an unknown variable in this trip back to San Francisco. At precisely 7 o'clock, I entered the restaurant my father had selected, an old-school establishment known for impeccable service and traditional cuisine. The maître d' led me to a corner table where my parents were already seated, my father rising formally as I approached. "Maya," my mother greeted me, her smile polite but tentative. "You look well." "Very professional," my father added, as though approving a suitable business outfit rather than greeting his daughter. I took the open seat, accepting the menu offered by the hovering server. "Thank you both for suggesting dinner. It's been a while since we've done this." 3 years, 4 months, my father said precisely. "Since you moved to Seattle." The specificity surprised me that he had tracked the time so exactly when he had always seemed so detached from my life choices. "How was the remainder of the symposium?" my mother asked as we studied our menus. "Your father said your presentation was very impressive." "It went well," I replied, still adjusting to this unfamiliar territory of parental interest in my professional life. The panel generated some excellent discussions about technology accessibility. "I didn't understand everything," my father admitted, "but I could see that the audience respected your expertise. The woman who introduced you, Eleanor Whitmore, she's quite influential, isn't she?" The question revealed that he had researched Eleanor before attending. "Yes, her foundations direct significant funding toward technology initiatives with social impact." "And this is your field?" my mother asked, seeming genuinely uncertain. "Social impact technology?" I realized in that moment how little they actually knew about my career, despite my recent email sharing case studies and background information. "Digital transformation is my broader field," I explained. "I help organizations adapt to technological change in ways that serve human needs rather than just implementing technology for its own sake." My father nodded slowly. "And this advisory board position with Horizon Ventures that's related to this work?" "Yes. I'll be helping evaluate potential investments in companies developing technologies with transformative potential." "Like venture capital?" My mother's tone carried a note of surprise, as though she hadn't imagined me in a role associated with financial decision-making. "Similar, but with a focus on social and environmental impact alongside financial returns." The server returned to take our orders, providing a brief pause in the conversation. When he departed, my father cleared his throat, a gesture I recognized from childhood as preceding something he found difficult to say. "Your mother and I have been discussing your career," he began. "We realize we haven't fully appreciated the significance of your work." The admission hung in the air between us. Not quite an apology, but the closest my father had ever come to acknowledging a misjudgment. "We always worried," my mother added, her fingers nervously adjusting her napkin, "that you were sacrificing personal happiness for professional ambition. That's why we emphasized Olivia's choices as an alternative path." "You thought I was unhappy?" I asked, genuinely surprised by this perspective. My parents exchanged glances. "You were always so serious," my father said, "even as a child. While Olivia was social and expressive, you were intense, focused on your studies, on your projects. We interpreted that as isolation." "It wasn't isolation," I said softly. "It was concentration. I enjoyed the work itself, building, solving, creating. I still do." My mother reached across the table, briefly touching my hand, a rare gesture of physical affection from her. "We see that now. Or we're trying to. When your father attended your symposium, he said you looked fulfilled, engaged, connected with the audience and your fellow panelists." "I am," I confirmed. "This is the work I was meant to do." "And this Nathan Reed," my father segued awkwardly. "Olivia mentioned you've been working closely with him on this advisory position." I suppressed a smile at the transparent pivot. Even in this new territory of acknowledging my professional success, they couldn't resist steering the conversation toward my personal life. "Nathan founded Horizon Ventures," I explained. "He's brilliant at identifying technologies with transformative potential. We share similar perspectives on responsible innovation." "He seems quite accomplished for someone so young," my mother observed. "Olivia said he's considered quite a catch in San Francisco circles." There it was, the familiar pressure, just packaged differently. Instead of criticizing my career focus, they were now looking for ways to integrate it with their persistent concern about my marital status. "He's an excellent colleague," I said firmly. "We work well together professionally." My father nodded, accepting my boundary with surprising grace. "Well, we're pleased to see you finding your place in such a prestigious organization. The Horizon portfolio companies we researched are quite impressive." The conversation shifted to safer territory after that. Updates on extended family, Olivia's honeymoon travels, a recent renovation at their home. Throughout the meal, I observed subtle changes in my parents' approach to me. Less directive, more curious, occasionally even deferential when topics touched on my areas of expertise. It wasn't a complete transformation. My mother still managed to mention friends' children who had balanced successful careers with marriage and family. My father still demonstrated more interest in the prestigious connections my work created than in the substance of the work itself. But there was movement, small shifts in perception that suggested they were beginning to see me through a different lens. As we finished dessert, my father signaled for the check. "We've been thinking," he said, glancing at my mother, "about visiting Seattle sometime. If your schedule would permit, of course." The invitation startled me. In 3 years, neither of them had suggested visiting my adopted city. "I'd like that," I said honestly. "Seattle has a lot to offer, especially in the summer months." "Perhaps July, then," my mother suggested. "When your father's court schedule is lighter, July would be perfect," I agreed, realizing I was genuinely looking forward to showing them the life I'd built. My condo overlooking Elliott Bay, my favorite local spots, perhaps even my office at Axiom. After saying goodbye in the restaurant lobby, I declined their offer of a shared ride and chose to walk back to my hotel through the evening streets. The city felt different tonight. Not the place I'd fled in frustration years ago, but a landscape of new possibility. My phone chimed with a message from Nathan. "Hope dinner went well. Still on for tomorrow at 10? I typed back. "Better than expected. See you at 10? Then slipped the phone back into my pocket and continued walking, enjoying the gentle evening air and the sense of things shifting into a new alignment. The next morning I arrived at Horizon's offices, precisely at 10, coffee in hand, and mind clear. The reception area was quiet. Apparently Nathan preferred to keep traditional office hours rather than embracing the tech industry's culture of early morning meetings. "Maya, welcome back," he greeted me, emerging from a conference room. "Perfect timing. I was just reviewing the materials for our discussion." He led me to a smaller meeting room than yesterday's tour had included, an intimate space with comfortable chairs arranged around a round table rather than the formal boardroom setup. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the bay, while the opposite wall displayed a collection of framed photographs, children using tablet computers in a rural classroom, elderly patients connected to healthcare providers through telehealth interfaces, farmers checking crop data on smartphones. "These are from portfolio companies?" I asked, examining the images. "Yes," Nathan confirmed. "I like to keep visual reminders of why we do this work. It's easy to get caught up in term sheets and valuation models and forget the human impact behind the numbers." We settled at the table, where digital tablets awaited with presentation materials already loaded. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed 3 potential investment opportunities: a water purification technology using AI to optimize treatment protocols, a platform connecting artisans in developing countries directly to global markets, and a cybersecurity solution designed specifically for nonprofit organizations. The discussion flowed naturally between strategic considerations and technical details. Nathan listened intently to my observations, asking probing questions that helped clarify my thinking, offering counterpoints that challenged my assumptions in constructive ways. "What I appreciate about your perspective," he said as we concluded the review of the final opportunity, "is that you consistently bring the conversation back to implementation realities. Many advisors focus exclusively on the technology innovation or the market opportunity, but you understand that success depends on how these solutions integrate into human systems. That's where most digital transformations succeed or fail," I replied. "Not in the technology itself, but in the human, organizational, and cultural elements of implementation." He nodded thoughtfully. Exactly why you're such a valuable addition to our advisory board. The conversation shifted to logistics for the upcoming formal board meeting, then to broader industry trends in digital transformation. As noon approached, Nathan suggested continuing over lunch. There's a quiet cafe on the ground floor, he offered. Nothing fancy, but excellent food and privacy for conversation. The cafe proved to be exactly as described, understated but thoughtfully designed, with well-spaced tables and acoustic features that allowed for conversation without shouting. As we settled with our meals, Nathan's expression turned more reflective. "May I ask you something personal, Maya?" The question surprised me. Throughout our professional interactions, he had maintained a respectful boundary between business discussions and personal inquiry. "Of course," I replied, curious about what he wanted to know. "What made you leave San Francisco 3 years ago?" From a career perspective, it would have seemed the natural place for someone with your expertise. I considered the question, appreciating that he'd framed it in professional rather than personal terms. "Several factors aligned at once," I said honestly. Axiom offered me the opportunity to build their digital transformation practice from the ground up, which was professionally compelling. But I also needed... I paused, searching for the right words. "Distance?" he suggested perceptively. "Yes. From family expectations. From always being seen through a particular lens. In Seattle, no one had preconceived notions about who I was or wasn't. I could define myself through my work and choices rather than in relation to family narratives." He nodded. "I understand that more than you might think. I left Minnesota at 18 and didn't return for nearly a decade. Not until I had built something that forced people to see me differently." "And did they?" I asked. "See you differently when you returned?" "Some did," he acknowledged. "Others simply incorporated my success into their existing narrative. Always knew that Reed Boy would do well, without actually revising their understanding of who I was." His observation resonated deeply. That's what I'm experiencing now with my parents. They're impressed by the external markers of success, the symposium invitation, the advisory board position, but I'm not sure they truly understand the work itself or why it matters to me. "Does that still bother you?" he asked gently. I considered the question carefully. "Less than it used to," I admitted. "Dinner last night was... different. They're making an effort to see me more clearly, even if they don't fully grasp what I do. That feels like progress." "It is progress," he affirmed. "And perhaps that's enough. Not complete understanding, but mutual respect for different paths." We finished our lunch, the conversation shifting back to professional topics as we discussed the upcoming quarter's focus areas for the advisory board. As we prepared to leave, Nathan hesitated. "I know you're returning to Seattle this evening, but I was wondering if you might consider extending your San Francisco visits in the future. Beyond the formal board meetings, I mean. There are several portfolio companies I think would benefit from your specific expertise if you're open to more direct advisory roles." "Like with LearnPath?" I asked, intrigued by the proposition. "Exactly. Your conversation with Sophia yesterday generated more actionable insights than weeks of traditional consulting might have. I'd like to facilitate more of those connections." The opportunity appealed to me on multiple levels, professionally expanding my impact beyond traditional consulting, personally creating more reasons to reclaim my relationship with San Francisco on new terms. "I'd be interested in exploring that," I replied. "My schedule at Axiom has some flexibility, especially for projects aligned with our mission." "Excellent." His smile conveyed genuine pleasure at my response. "I'll have my team work with yours to coordinate logistics for future visits." As we walked back toward the elevator, Nathan added, "And Maya, I want you to know how much I value not just your expertise, but your perspective. In an industry often dominated by technological determinism, your human-centered approach is refreshing." The compliment warmed me more than I expected. "Thank you. That means a great deal coming from you." We parted at the elevator, with promises to connect before the formal board meeting the following month. As I rode down to the lobby, I found myself reflecting on the trajectory that had brought me to this moment. From the awkward sister at a wedding reception to a valued advisor helping shape investments that could transform lives. The past month had unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted. What began as an obligation to attend my sister's wedding had catalyzed a series of opportunities that aligned perfectly with my professional strengths and personal values. More than that, it had shifted the dynamics with my family in subtle but significant ways, not erasing years of misunderstanding, but creating space for new patterns of interaction. Outside, San Francisco sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. I decided to walk for a while before returning to my hotel, taking in the city that had once represented constraint but now offered expansion. Each step felt like reclamation of the city, of my narrative, of the freedom to define success on my own terms. My phone vibrated with an incoming call, Olivia's name appearing on the screen. I answered, curious about her timing. "How is dinner with the parents?" she asked without preamble. On a scale from excruciating to merely uncomfortable? I laughed. Actually, it was surprisingly decent. Dad talked about my work without changing the subject. Mom only mentioned marriage 3 times instead of the usual dozen. They're even planning to visit Seattle this summer. Wow, Olivia sounded genuinely surprised. That's practically a revolution in the Winters household. Maybe there's hope for them yet? Maybe there is, I agreed, realizing how much my own perspective had shifted. How are things with you and James? Good, she replied. Different than I expected, but good. He's actually interested in the charity work I've always wanted to do but never pursued seriously. Says it would be a perfect project for me to lead now that we're settled. That's wonderful, Olivia, I said, genuinely pleased for her. You always had great instincts for community needs. Thanks, she said, sounding slightly embarrassed by the compliment. Listen, James and I are hosting a dinner next month for some of his family's foundation partners. The Whitmores will be there, and Nathan Reed, too. Would you consider coming? Not as my sister, but as, you, the digital transformation expert. The invitation represented a profound shift in our relationship, Olivia acknowledging my professional identity, rather than trying to subsume it under familial roles. I'd like that, I said. Just let me know the date and I'll coordinate with my other San Francisco commitments. You have multiple San Francisco commitments now? She asked, sounding impressed. Look at you, becoming bi-coastal. It seems that way, I agreed. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes. After we disconnected, I continued my walk, eventually finding myself at the waterfront, where container ships moved slowly across the horizon. I thought about the containers, how they connected distant ports, transporting goods between worlds that might otherwise remain separate. In some ways, I was becoming a container myself, moving between Seattle and San Francisco, between my established consulting practice and this new advisory role, between the family that had shaped me and the professional community that recognized my value. Not a rejection of any single place or identity, but an expansion into something more complex and complete. A life defined not by others' expectations or even by reaction against those expectations, but by authentic choice and contribution. As the afternoon light began to soften, I turned back toward my hotel to prepare for my evening flight. San Francisco stretched before me, familiar streets now holding new possibilities. A city I was reclaiming not as a place to escape from, but as one facet of an expanding life. My phone chimed with a final message from Nathan. Safe travels back to Seattle. Looking forward to continuing our collaboration next month. I smiled and typed back, thank you for everything. This is just the beginning. And it was not just of a professional relationship or a new chapter in my career, but of a life where I no longer needed to choose between who I had been and who I was becoming. I could be both and more. The sister, the daughter, the expert, the advisor, the woman charting her own course through a world that was finally beginning to see her clearly. As I walked the final blocks to my hotel, each step felt grounded in a new certainty. Not that everything would be perfect moving forward, but that I had found my center, my voice, my place. Not despite my family's misunderstanding, not in rebellion against their expectations, but in authentic alignment with my own values and vision. The journey ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges and complications. Family dynamics don't transform overnight, and professional recognition comes with its own pressures and responsibilities. But for perhaps the first time, I felt fully equipped to navigate whatever came next, secure in my expertise, clear in my purpose, and increasingly surrounded by people who saw and valued me for exactly who I was. That, I realized, was the true triumph. Not proving others wrong, but finding the courage to be authentically right for myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.